Hi, my name is Rabbi Cheryl Weiner. I am a chaplain with Mishkan, Miami, the spiritual connection for the Greater Miami Jewish Federation. I'm here to talk about Parashat Toldot, which is in Breshit and is one of my favorite pieces of the narrative of our story. When we take these stories and they come alive for us in various ways, and they often come from a single verse. After Esau has returned from his hunt and realizes that he's lost his blessing to his brother Yaakov, he cries a great cry. Vayitzak Sa'aka Gedolah. Twice he cries out, "Have you but one blessing, Father? Borcheni gam ani avi. Bless me too, Father." And Esau wept aloud. And later, when Rebekah helps Jacob escape from Esau's rage, she does so saying, "Let me not lose you both in one day." So let's transition from these laments into a midrashic narrative that reclaims Esau and allows us to look at our narrative in another perspective. This is a tale of prophecy, a tale of Rebekah's sorrow. I am Rebekah, your mother, wife of Isaac. I live in the light of Sarah's tent, in the shadow of Abraham's seeking, an inheritor of an ancient God. This part of our midrash begins as the Torah states, "These are the descendants of Isaac, the descendant of Abraham. But I am absent. My voice is silenced, destined to play a part in the story that I did not write, with an ending that you have not heard." I spoke directly to God, and God answered me. Forever I was destined to be tormented by the divine prophecy playing itself out in my womb. Two nations are in your womb. Two separate peoples shall issue from your body. The one people shall be mightier than the other, and the older shall serve the younger. When my children came, I was in the throes of agony to release them. The red-haired one who came first was named Esau and nicknamed Edom for the redness of his temperament and the food that would feed his faith. His frail brother came out holding on to Esau's heel. He was named Jacob after the heel that he was holding, which bound him forever to Esau. I was bereaved at their birth, knowing that I would sacrifice them both to uphold God's will. As the children grew, they expressed themselves differently. Esau was the life force of the world, boisterous, healthy, funny, a hot-headed monster set to devour all that was placed before him. He lived in the moment and in his feelings. His spirit soared through his arrows in the field, and he was rewarded with bounty, which he shared freely with us all. His father loved him, and without end, for he saw in his son the trust that was taken from him by his father, Abraham, at the mountain. Trust in the earth, trust in himself, and trust in God. He also saw in him his brother Ishmael, who he missed as his companion, his complement. When his son hugged him, he felt the exuberance of life. For Isaac, Esau was God's gift. In Esau, God had given me only a guilt offering, a child I would have to sacrifice to God in order to fulfill the prophecy. I could not allow myself to love this child. I was going to have to impose a destiny on him, which was not of his making. Knowing this kept me at a distance. His hugs warmed me, but I shrugged him off. His openness only wounded me because I knew that I would use his simple trust to steal his birthright. I was the thief, not Jacob. I only prayed that the God who I obeyed was the true God. Thus I poured my heart out to Jacob, the joy of my life. He was the quiet child of the mind. He yearned for the stories of the hearth and would sit for hours enthralled with the tales of his ancestors. Somehow he knew that he was hearing the stories that would forever remain his legacy. He needed to know every nuance, every detail, so that he could pass these words on to his children and his children's children. Isaac loved Jacob, but could not get close to him. Jacob was too close to God. When they were together, Jacob would ask him questions about Abraham and Sarah. Isaac could not answer and sent the child away in tears, not understanding what he had done wrong. Isaac knew that this was the child who would inherit. Jacob was the one who thirsted for the wells of wisdom, which Isaac himself had uncovered in the desert. He was the one who would struggle to understand the God who had hurt Isaac so much. Isaac knew that Jacob would restore the tradition. Isaac knew, but he was too weary to help me raise Jacob. He left me alone to fulfill the prophecy. He would do his part when the time came. The story played itself out as you know it, each of us playing the parts that would realize the prophecy. Foolishly, Esau gave up his birthright for food at the end of a hunt. True, Jacob manipulated it out of him, but Esau let him do it. Later, I got Jacob to pretend to be Esau so that Isaac would bless him. Another manipulation, but Isaac allowed it. When Esau realized how he had been betrayed, he cried out, pleading for his blessing. Like a knife, his words pierced my heart. Isaac wept, Esau raged, Jacob fled. God followed Jacob to Haran, and we were left to finish our story on our own. Esau tried to make it right. He sought a wife from Ishmael, hoping that it would strengthen the family ties. How little he understood his true inheritance. Alone in my tent, I suffered for many years. Esau went off with his wives, strangers to us all. He had children, bred flocks of sheep, and prospered. Isaac remained behind the eyes that were blind, but could see beyond. Somehow he had been prepared for this silence. Slowly we returned to each other for solace, for companionship, for worship. For who was left to us but God? The Torah narrative continued without us. One day I was cooking. A strange presence came up behind me and hugged me. Waves of feeling flooded my senses. Who was this? I turned and saw Esau, grown. After many days of talking and crying and anger and remorse, we reconciled. At last, I could hug him the way I had yearned to hug him as a child. No longer did I have to fear that I would lose him. He brought his wives to my tent, and I learned to understand their ways. He brought his children to me, and I loved them with a love that had no bounds. They were my children, not God's. No sacrifice was required. In the end, I was blessed. I had a husband who was world weary, but whose soul had expanded with every wound. He never denied God. He never denied me. He was blinded by his trust, but he received wisdom beyond his eyes. Esau stayed with us beyond the rage into life. He gave us grandchildren and good times. Once his anger had abated, he faced his fate with fearlessness. His courage had been undaunted. He came back to both of us, the mother who had betrayed him, the father who had let her. In his pain, he had opened his heart to God and had been healed. In the end, it was his nurturance of us both that sustained us in our old age. And Jacob, he returned home with a new name, Israel, for he had wrestled with the God who had formulated our fate. He met Esau at the borders. Were they reconciled also? The Torah says otherwise. While they embraced and Esau invited him home, Jacob never came. They met again to bury their father, but that was the end of their connection. Esau took his flocks and his family to the east, following after Ishmael and even Cain, the banished sons. He was able to create a kingdom, but not a kinship. While Jacob remained at the center of the story, his life was littered with tragedy. He never saw me again, for I was the center of his pain. I had separated him from his father. I had shown him a way of betraying his brother. I had sent him to Haran, to my family, who continued the deceptions and betrayals. He thrived, but at what cost? While I was buried with the family in the cave at Machpelah, Jacob had buried me long before. The prophecy was fulfilled. Esau's people served Jacob's people. Yet had it not been for Esau's preservation of our land and us as his parents, to whom would Jacob have returned? To this day, the tradition has not allowed Esau to rest easy. But what did he do? The text of the story is all that remains. My story was never revealed. As my life came to a close, it was in Esau's arms that I died. Those hairy red arms, strong and sinewy, smelling of life. He would be exiled from his heritage, but not from my heart any longer. For God did not abandon me. Esau returned to me as my comfort in my old age. God gave him back to me, healed and free. The prophecy endured. The Torah told God's story, but not mine. As they had once struggled in my womb, ripping apart my life, now these brothers were joined together in my heart, consoling me at my death. Jacob, the beloved son of my youth. Esau, the beloved son of my old age. May both my sons be a blessing to you who inherit our stories, for they are the two parts of one being, my children both. I am their mother, and I love them whole. And I am your mother. I love you whole. And so what story will you tell your children? We come to the end of the story of prophecy and promise, of destiny and fate. However, by refocusing the reading of the Torah through the light of Midrash, we partner with God to illuminate its meaning in many forms. We can become Rebecca to bring Esau out of shame, just as I got to be a red-haired maverick who could fight for injustice. I could bring Esau out of exile as the symbol of Roman oppression. By breathing life into the text, we expand our destiny as individuals and as a people. Shabbat Shalom, and may the redheads thrive.